Well, our first guest is the writer and director of a new documentary entitled Hellbound, which poses the question, does hell exist? Who goes there and why? Kevin Miller joins us now from Saskatoon. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Lorna.
Hey, Kevin, it is a very thought-provoking documentary with many interviews, many locations. Why did you want to get us talking about hell?
Well, it actually started out as quite a personal project for me. I hadn't really, thought through, how political this topic could really be. But it really began back in the fall of 2008. I edited a book on this topic, and I'm a Christian, and I, have, of course, when I came to faith when I was 9 years old, hell was part of the picture, and it's something I think that's always been percolating underneath my faith. And I edited a book for a guy named Brad Jersak called Her Gates Will Never Be Shut that opened me up to this really interesting historical conversation about the doctrine. Looking at all the different terms in the Bible that are typically translated as hell and looking at the various interpretive traditions. So I found this so fascinating, I really just wanted to make a film that would share some of this information. And it just so happened that as I began working on developing the film in early 2011, suddenly it became a very hot issue in the United States with the publication of Rob Bell's book, Love Wins. So it showed me that the time to have this debate or discussion is now. And so the timing of the film couldn't have been better.
Boy, I think we should go spoiler alert here. Do you want us? Can I declare what my conclusion was about you as I watched the movie, or do you want us to just leave the spoiler alert off?
Well, I don't know. I guess it depends what the spoiler is.
Well, I felt you were a universalist, that everybody wins at the end. Is that the way? Is that the approach you concluded with this documentary?
Well, I think what the film says and what I believe are two very different things. And I think what we're ultimately arguing for in the film is not a specific position as it is really a way of holding beliefs. And that, really no matter what you believe about hell, I think the most important thing is what kind of a person does your theology lead you to become? What kind of a civilization do we build based on our theology? Because we're always building our world based on these ultimate beliefs or worldviews. And so what we're really calling the audience to in the end of the film is to I think at the most we're calling them to is an openness to at least consider, because at various times in history certain doctrines do become a litmus test and a way of trying to define the parameters of the group, and how do we develop an identity. I think the question is, how do we develop a strong identity without being so exclusive that we become like thought police when people start to maybe suggest other ideas, that we don't just scapegoat them and expel them from the group.
Well, and there's a great point you make about how can we have a dialogue about something so controversial and still be good neighbors with each other. You found some remarkably polarizing characters in this documentary. How did you do that?
Well, when you're researching a film like this, you really cast the net far and wide, and you're trying to get a broad spectrum of views. So we have everyone from atheists, former Catholic turned atheist, to death metal musicians, to exorcists, to people who would hold to a strong form of universalism, theologians, pastors, that sort of thing. So you really cast the net wide and hope to represent a broad range of views. And yeah, some of these people are polarizing, but I think ultimately I'm hoping what Hellbound does is not polarize people further, but really open up conversation and dialogue. Because I think it's really important. If you can't bring your questions to the church, where can you bring them? And I think that there's people out there who will sort of talk about dialogue, but is it true dialogue? Because it's like, yeah, we'll consider those other positions just to show you how wrong they are. But I think true dialogue can happen when we actually put everything on the table and say, the universe is what it is no matter what we believe about it. So let's study, and let's try and be as open as possible.
Okay, I was particularly struck by the fact that you took the idea of narrative, story, and you went to one of your heroes, screenwriter Robert McKee, and he's an atheist, and he said life is interesting because it is story, and what makes story interesting is characters and the choices they make. So before I give you the quote about what Robert says about hell, is this really a movie about helping us think also about what choice am I making about God?
Well, definitely. I think what the argument that Robert McKee makes, and McKee is very famous for being a teacher of screenwriters throughout the world, and the argument he makes is that without hell, there's no consequence for the choices we make, and that choices are what give life meaning. So if you take away hell, life loses meaning. And so really, I think we spend a lot of the film trying to respond to that argument. And the question I would have is, yeah, definitely we all believe that choices need to have consequences, but do those consequences ultimately have to be irreversible for a choice to have meaning? And I think we can kind of examine that logic in various other parts of life and see that perhaps it's not as absolute as it first appears.
Yeah, you quote the clip you play of Mr. McKee is, he says, as an atheist, he says, the notion that there really isn't hell is simply a wussy effort by certain people to make God a nice guy because they can't deal with the dichotomy that God is both protector and punisher. How did that affect you when you first heard it?
Yeah, well, I really love Robert because he's just such an outspoken guy. And I mean, he's really a brilliant man and has a lot of wisdom on many areas, particularly religion and mythology and the various our efforts to really make sense of our lives through story. And so when he says something like that, I take it really seriously. And I think that anybody that is questioning the idea of eternal torment should ask, is this something that's just motivated by an inability to face up to the harsh realities of life? I mean, let's face it, death is not something I like to think about, but it's real and it's going to happen. And so there are some harsh realities in life. And so when it comes to something like hell, though, again, there are many ways to look at this. And I think one of the problems is that we find when people question our view, rather than actually consider the argument that they're making, we impugn their character. And we say, well, it's a weakness of character that causes you to have that view, as opposed to actually listening to, why they might be articulating that view. So again, in Hellbound, we're trying to move people past an emotional knee-jerk reaction to competing ideologies and really promote listening and reasoning together, because we're all subjective beings. None of us has a corner on the truth. And so I think that there's a great benefit to having many people, give us counsel.
All right, and what kind of reaction have you been getting? You've screened it in the U.S., it's moving across Canada. The reaction, what's the public been saying?
We're getting different reactions. I think the overwhelming reaction has been, thank you for making this movie, even from people who don't necessarily agree with where the film or where they think the film ends up or what I might believe. But I think people really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. And again, that's what we're trying to do with Hellbound, is make it safe to have this conversation. I mean, I've met with pastors and professors who right now are fearful about sharing their views or even raising questions about the idea of eternal torment. And I think that's not a very healthy situation. I think that if your theology ultimately is driven by fear of being wrong or fear of God or fear of all these different things, I think that's time to stop and take a second look, because really the gospel is about setting us free from fear, not binding us up in fear. And so yeah, some audience people have been upset about it, but overwhelmingly I think it's been a positive reaction.
All right, Kevin Miller, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Lorna.
You know what, let me just say that goodbye one more time, Kevin.
Sure.
You're one of those men I have difficulty saying goodbye to. There we go. Kevin Miller, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Good, and you're at Bethany Bible Institute tonight.
I was there this morning.
Oh, how did that go?
It was fantastic, actually, and we're going to have, probably half the student population of the screening tonight.
Oh.